So I'm going to start by going through the sort of choreography of the evening. We have a variety of events. So people are coming in the room, for those of you who are online, so just to give you a sense of a play-by-play.
You're welcome to pass through and sure.
We're going to start with a salon conversation between Angie and I and Nancy and I and Angie Hauser. Followed by an open studio and a reception at Contact Quarterly's studio downstairs. And that will be followed at 7 o'clock with a jam in the Wildlife Sanctuary space, Marlon and Haley space. So before we get started, I want to give some thank yous out to a lot of people that helped make this happen. So the first is the Northampton Arts Council, Thea Lee at the Wildlife Sanctuary Studio, Lonnie and Haley for her space, which we're in right now. Marlon Barrios Solano from Dance Tech for his technical assistance and giving us the channel to make this webcast. The Smith College Dance Department for donating chairs and mats and Nancy and I. And thank you so much for the people who are in the room and those of you who are online. So I'm going to turn it over to Angie.
Yeah. Hi. To figure out who I'm talking to, so we are spread. I'm Angie Hauser, and I just want to introduce Chris and Nancy before we get started. Nancy, as most of us know, but I'll say it. She was a co-founder and co-editor of Contact Quarterly, and she's also of the original group that was, as we were talking earlier, in the room when Contact Improvisation was being born and first practiced, and was in the original performances of the work, and has been a part of it ever since. She teaches the work throughout the world, and she also develops her own research through the Underscore, which is I don't know, do you call it a form, a score that she has been developing for many years and is also practiced globally. And she tours a lot of that work with her collaborator Mike Vargas, and has danced with the who's who of Contact Improvisation and performed with them. And then Mr. Chris Aiken is also a longtime practitioner of the form and a teacher and performer, and Nancy was his mentor at one point, and then they've become collaborators and partners in crime and teaching this form at times. And also Andrew Harwood, I want to mention, was one of your mentors. And he has been, I think he's most known for practicing this form and integrating it in relationship to performance and how, can you just wait a second? Why don't you go talk to Mike about it?
It's live TV.
Live!
Reality TV.
So what I was saying, so Chris, I think is best known for, I guess, 3 decades of integrating contact improvisation with his performance work in improvisation as performance, and just researching how those two inform each other, as well as teaching it throughout the world, and also collaborating. You guys share a lot of collaborators in performance work. And I think that's it. And he teaches at Smith College now, I should say.
Let's check in about the tech. Are you guys on?
Yeah, the live, the internet is too slow, so we're gonna have Aretha boot off so that
So it'll be faster connection for her.
yeah,
I see.
I'll text if there's some problems.
yeah, she's gonna text me.
Okay.
So
So she's going to connect downstairs so that she's not using the same Wi-Fi, so that it speeds up the Wi-Fi for the iPad.
Oh, okay. All right.
so you're on now.
All right.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so now I've forgotten our choreography. So I guess I will start by asking you, Nancy, to give us a little bit of context about contact improvisation. Contact Quarterly, sorry. Give us some context.
4 hours in.
Soon to meet CQs and CIs and some context and a little bit of the history of the magazine and kind of the work there.
So, a little bit of background, a little bit of foreground. Background is that Contact Quarterly started in 1975 in Stinson Beach, California, actually. During the first tour that we did, or not the first tour in California, a reunion tour with Steve Paxton and actually Danny wasn't there that year. Nita Little, Kurt Siddall, myself, Lisa Nelson was there videotaping, and this was the point where we had been actually on tour a little bit for a couple of years. Contact started in '72, so by '75 we had been touring a bit, and we were hearing about people who were injured from watching performances and trying it. So we thought, what are we doing to make it safe? Maybe we should certify people and copyright, and we decided not to. This is when we decided not to. And instead to start a newsletter so people could communicate with one another, stay in touch with what was going on, because people, the 5 to 10 people who were doing contact improvisation at the time lived in different parts of the country, so we weren't near each other, so we thought, well, let's have a newsletter so we could stay in touch with what's going on, who are you working with, how's it going, what's happening in the work. And with a little address list in the back so people could find each other. And that was the beginning of the magazine. Really from the beginning, we shared other kinds of work that we found relevant and interesting. And those two strands, the contact improvisation and the so-called relevant, nearby developing work in the movement and somatics and improvisation fields, were included in the magazine. It moved from California. Lisa and I both ended up here. Lisa came into co-editing and working on the magazine quite early, Lisa Nelson.
Here being Northampton.
Yes, we're in Massachusetts. We are in Massachusetts, but other people watching us are not. We're in Northampton, Massachusetts, actually, in Western Mass. And Lisa and I both came to this area because Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen was starting her school here, and we were interested in that work, and I also needed a base for East Coast touring. I was still living in California. And we found a printer who we liked for the magazine, because the magazine moved wherever I was, and a printer, a typesetter, so we stayed, and we found an office, and it had a full-time staff, not full-time staff, but an office. And we're still here.
Full-time rent.
Yeah, full-time rent. So we're still here, and I wanted to fast forward to now, 40 years later, and I don't know how many, maybe 95 magazines later. Because it actually wasn't quarterly, except for maybe 1 year of these 40 years. First year, I think we had 5, the second year 4, and then we went to a double season, so there were 3 a year, and then it went to 2 a year. And now we're exploding all over the place with journals, chapbooks, dance directories, online stuff, and into the future. So behind the camera right there is Katie Elward, who's also a dancer, and she's the operations and office manager of CQ, and you can't see her. But what, you can step in front of me. And Aretha, who just went downstairs for faster Wi-Fi, is also a dancer and is our editorial associate in the office. Dawn Siebel, who you'll meet when you go downstairs for reception, is the products and shipping manager. And Eliza Larson, who is our ads and marketing manager, who had a big hand in setting this up and making these t-shirts, which you notice we have. And come on in. She's in Portland, Oregon. She moved to Portland, Oregon, so she's probably with us in a cafe somewhere in Portland. She also went through the Smith program, so there's a lot of overlapping connections. Lisa Nelson is in Vermont right now as we speak, maybe connected, and Steve Paxton is there, without whom none of us would be in this room right now talking about this. Who else? There's an advisory board, which has been really important, including Chris and other folks. I won't name everyone. And designers and people who are working remotely. I guess this is the way the world is now, is that we like to try to stay in physical presence, thus this event, but we're pretty spread out. And here we are right now.
Can I just say something about in the age before the internet, Contact Quarterly was this incredible resource. Most of us who are traveling would have a copy of Contact Quarterly with us, because that in the back of it were the contacts lists were. That's how you knew when you went to a new city who to call to say where's the gym, where's the class, and it's been an amazing resource for so many people. And you could know you were with your people when you go into somebody's house and you look on their bookshelf and there's this stack of Contact Quarterly, because nobody ever throws them out. We all treasure them, and every time we move all the Contact Quarterlies, and we still have them in our house. And yeah, it's just meant a lot to so many people over the years, both through those connections, but also through the articles and the opportunities to see how the form has branched out in so many different ways, and how it's connected to other forms of improvisation and contemporary dance.
So we're here to talk about current issues in contact improvisation, yes. Particularly through your eyes as teachers and travelers who've been all over teaching the form and working in different communities who have taken on the practice of contact improvisation and made it fit to their interest and their communities. And so to hear some from each of you what's going on out there and how it might relate to where we are now. But when we talked, the three of us, we had kind of landed on this idea that the diversification of the form, of how it is changing and offshooting and relating back to itself, or becoming totally new tangents from where it began, and how you guys are both finding that out in the travels that you're doing, and how you perceive it impacting the teaching and understanding of what contact improvisation is. And so I just wonder if one or both of you could start by breaking that down a little bit.
We've had already some like 3 fabulous conversations where we just are going at it and trying to find some axis for this conversation. And maybe it's like the work itself, that it just is so generative, and there were so many interesting conversations that it was a little bit hard to fix on it one thing. But what occurred to me when we were talking, well, one thing I'll say, and that might apply as we go along, is that I realize over and over that I'm looking at this work from two very distinct perspectives. And one of them relates to my role with Contact Quarterly and my relationship to contact improvisation from being there in the beginning, is that I'm interested in everything. From that point of view, the phenomena of it, what's going on, what are people doing, how are they practicing, how are they talking about this, what's going on, all of it is interesting to me as a phenomenon. Then if I shift into my me, Nancy, individual, artist, person, I'm interested in specific things and not others. So I go back and forth all the time between this, like, yes, it's all interesting, and like, well, gee, I wouldn't want to do that, or I'm not that interested in that. So there's an interesting dynamic in that for me. So with that in mind, when we were talking, we kind of zoomed out for a moment to try to take a picture of what's going on now to the best that we could. And what I found useful as a phrase, an idea, was the diversification of the practice, the teaching, and the understanding of what contact improvisation is. So there's a lot of different interpretations going on out there, a lot of different reasons for practicing, a lot of different applications, conversations, jams, performances, ways of teaching. There's a lot of difference. And so, going a little further into that and thinking, could we identify different nodes of different centers of reasons for practicing? And we just kind of ran out a few of them. This is not any particular index other than how we were talking, but some of them were as an art form, which I would say was at least my original sense of what we were doing in dance form. Physical practice for a lot of reasons that you could approach technically or in many ways. A vehicle for social relations and community. A vehicle for choreographic research, for recreation.
As an artist yourself and a practitioner of the form, but as a teacher you have to go into really interact with this diverse agenda that you described. What center do you go to?
Well, I'm making as many problems as I'm solving in the way that I'm teaching, I'm afraid. Because I so respect the clarity of the physical form and the proposition as Steve proposed it. And I try to return to that. I try to sort of re-simplify, because the complexity through that is infinite and enormous and so satisfying. One of the images we've talked about of the frame in the empty middle of the contact improvisation proposition being a kind of frame in which we improvise, through which we improvise. So as a result of many years of people practicing and then extracting things for teaching and all of that, there's a lot of forms now that people do, a lot of material and vocabulary. So I'm constantly both teaching that and trying to reach through it to that open space and something in the charge of that proposition, which I find really brilliant, and so easily covered over with doing it this way and doing it that way. And, where are the principles? Where's the challenge? Where's the, as we've talked about also, that the changing notion of, am I trying to get good at anticipating what my partner expects and giving it to them, or not? And I would say not. I would say both. See, that's the problem. Yeah, that's where it continues to elude me, and I think that's part of the positive nature of it for me, is continuing to find a new question, or an old question that hasn't been resolved, or unresolving the old answers. That's something that I think I take away deeply from this work, is the challenge, the friendly challenge on a physical level, and that reverberates in other ways. So there's an article that Mary Fulkerson wrote a number of years ago called "Taking the Glove Without the Hand," which just moves me so much to think about that. I'm not sure what she meant, actually. I can't say that I really know what she meant, but what I take from that is that let's say in wearing a glove a long time, the actual outer shape of it has some substance, some recognizable substance, but what is informing it, the life that's informing it, that's making it the shape it is, and that's having it rubbed off in certain places, the life that's in it. If you take the life out of it and you just have this form, and you're repeating the form, what does that do? That said, again, there's other contradictions, like Tai Chi, for instance, where the form is very specific, and if you do it that way, it supposedly generates an experience. So does the experience generate the form, or does the form generate the experience? But the original problem I was going to mention is that I'm trying to bring a lot of other things into the improvisational field with contact improvisation. And I'm beginning to feel like contact improvisation might be like a prime number. You can't like, I don't know, divide and add and mix, and, you know, I keep trying, and I think there are a lot of potentials there, but there's something interesting about how problematic it is. To do that with focus and depth and challenging creative energy, be ready for whatever is coming, which is another part of it that I feel is so exciting to me over and over, and that can get lost, is being available for something you don't expect, rather than trying to learn what to expect and how to respond to it. Anyway, I'll stop here.
Well, just jumping off from there, we talked a little bit about the tension sometimes between skill work and getting back to the sort of proposition that if that learning skills is a really valuable practice. Learning how to do an Aikido roll, or learning how to sort of support someone on your shoulder or on your back, learning how to fall down. But there are ways of learning the skills that can take over and the proposition gets lost. And so one thing I've been having taught skills for many, many years, and always feeling this tension of you're teaching a class and you're doing skills, and then there's that moment in the class where it's like, okay, now we're going to dance. And how do we get out of the skill mindset into a more open improvisational mindset? And I found just a good proposition to help is to tune people to, and I got this from J.G. Gibson, is what is perceptible. He said in studying perception, many people study what they think is in the mind, and he said, focus on what is perceptible. In other words, focus on what can you sense, what can you perceive through your skin, through your tissues. So when you're doing contact with somebody, rather than thinking about what's the next move, does my partner want me to do this or that, it's just immediately sensing what can I perceive at this moment. Oh, and they're moving here. Oh, I sense there's more pressure now, there's less pressure. I feel a vibration in their body, I feel tension in my own body. And so in doing that, it occupies my attention so much that I'm not concerned with what I'm doing. Meaning, in the sense of trying to achieve something. I'm focused on the present moment of what is going on right now. And for me, the skills support that activity, and they become a foundation as opposed to a goal.
Well, and then the next question for me is, what do you mean by skills, and what skills? Because one of these things about the so-called frame in the empty middle was like, what if we go back to, let's say, my experience with Steve and this proposition, what did he establish as practice, as a reference for the practice, like the small dance of standing and rolling and throwing ourselves at each other and improvising. But then that was it, and then you met on the mat and you made some sense of it, you improvised, you tried things, you saw how it worked, you learned from watching, you tried it again the next time, you changed it up, you know. So, but what you put in that frame, in terms of physical references, perceptual practices, is what I would keep referring to, even unconsciously when I was improvising. That's what frames it. And there's also a kind of, I'm feeling like an inflection or a kind of mind that you throw into that empty space. Like, how are you improvising in there? And I'm not really sure how Steve did that. But there were different sort of oblique ways. It's not, now you should be feeling this way about what you're doing, and you're doing it for this reason, and this is what you're getting out of it, and that's why I'm giving you that. You know, it wasn't, for me anyway, it wasn't like that. It was a frame and an impetus. Mm-hmm. And also experience of watching each other's interpretations and being excited by things, and then learning from each other in that way. So if you, and this frame and empty middle thing came up at a teachers' conference actually for contact, and people were blasting out all these ideas about, they wrote on the wall all these hundreds of things that they felt like they needed to teach as skills. Then I thought, why? Why do you need to, I wish I could have an example, like why do you I don't know, like most of them I thought, why do you need to do that to do contact? So I kept having this image of like, what's behind this wall where all these words are written down? Is there a bit of a root? Is there a bit of a something to refer to? And how important is it to refer to some sense of an original proposition? Maybe it's migrating or something. Maybe it's going to be something else.
Maybe you can talk about things you perceive outside of your own teaching, but maybe it's just what you guys are doing. When you were talking, I was thinking, what is your frame that you try to create in your collaborations or in your classes? What's kind of important now as a kind of current thing for you teaching the form? What would go in that frame?
Well, you said this earlier, but I resonated deeply with it, this idea of creating and solving problems. So on a basic level, rather than giving people choreography of how to get from lying down to standing, you give them opportunities to explore how they might do that. And you suggest that your goal is to develop a repertoire of solutions that is open-ended, but you're not trying to get to a perfect solution. You're developing that skill, and then so one skill that's quite common in context is how do you approach somebody when you're not touching them, and how do you make contact with somebody? Well, solving that problem over and over and over gives you many, many, many different solutions to that, and that's what the skill is. It's the ability to solve that problem in many different ways, and as you're improvising, you have a lot of choices of how to do that, and you have practice to rely upon. So I'm not trying to achieve a particular thing. I'm using those skills to support the action of improvising with someone.
And I like that you said that it's solving the problems, but it's creating and solving problems over and over again. That, like, as they say, the having the problematizing of it. And I think that is what you're not trying to like wrap it up in a bow. And I think when I have danced with you and I see you, it's like sometimes yes, sometimes much more convoluted or something that pokes at what's happening. So what would be
it's a question of like I guess you do need some baseline off of which to start to deconstruct or challenge. So there's some basis of safety in meeting another body. And also using space spherically, and gravity is really a very strong orientation, like how to have a relationship to gravity. I mean, a conscious, maybe more felt relationship. And that dialogue already is sort of the beginning, and it's extended then to another body, I would say. So I do think a lot of, as I rethink some of these original things, I feel like a lot of our practice was solo practice that tuned our awareness in our body in certain ways to very small things also in the gravity system, and then to listen to that in another body, and that is sort of a basis for developing a conversation. That physical conversation isn't used as a metaphor quite as much anymore, I don't think. But I guess I still feel that. So it is a give and take. It's like, what do you think about this? Oh, well, I think, maybe this. Oh, but how about this? Okay, but. Instead of, what did you mean by that? Or do I understand you correctly? Or like that kind of conversation. But all kinds of conversations really can happen in this medium, I think. And that's where the things diverge. How are you having a conversation and what are you talking about? But, so I think that basic tuning to subtlety in the body, in its gravity system and other forces, when is there touch, not touch, how depth of touch, is it on the surface, is it coming under, perception of structure, stability, instability in your own body and in another body. That's to me a big conversation, part of the conversation. The big subject is like destabilizing and in a constant state of flux. And then the other person's reflexes and their imagination and curiosity come into the conversation, as do yours. Like, are you just trying to do the things that you know how to do so-called well, or safely, or gracefully, or something? Or are you going for the things that are a little bit out of your reach, just to see what's going to happen, and like, how do you play your risk range on a physical level? And also, I think that perceptual, the reorientation to spherical space is a real training. And having the head be in different relations to the body and the earth is very unusual. And a lot of people do contact that don't really feel that comfortable in that. They keep popping up. Their head is always on top, you know. So that seems like, and strengthening the ability to do that, although having said that, then you go to another extreme of doing contact with people with more severe physical disabilities and limitations. And they're not going to be doing handstands or whatever, it doesn't matter either. So then you have to go a couple more steps further of what's underneath those skills. And how do we still have a conversation about gravity and reflexes and choices and curiosity with whatever range we have. Because touch is a medium that we do share, regardless, and that's powerful. Yeah.
I was thinking about you had talked earlier about in the early days that everyone had sort of an individual practice. And I know one of the things that I've learned through the physical practice, my solo practice that I learned through doing contact was how to be resilient in the sense of how to deal with disequilibrium, how to, when I'm falling, how to figure out a way to solve that problem so I don't retract in fear. And I think that can be applied to any different kinds of people, that anyone could be working on resilience. And sometimes the resilience is might be about spherical space, but it might also be just the resilience to show up in that room with those people that are so different than I am, or the resilience to deal with pain and injuries, or the resilience to confront your fears. I mean, there's just many different ways to think about it, but you know, there's a controlled disorientation and chaos in contact, in the sense that it's not completely chaotic, but there's enough of the unknown that you're challenged. At least for me, I'm always challenged, and even if the person is moving very little, the challenge is, how am I going to relate to this person? And how am I going to show up with them and not just do my dance on them, or regardless of who they are. And to let go of my preconceptions of what I think contact is, to find a dance with that person, that's a different kind of resilience, and I have to practice it. And I can practice it on my own, and I can practice it with them. But together, those things have made me more capable of relating to different kinds of people. And I think a lot of people are drawn to contact in that way. You know, when it's no longer just about acrobatics, but it's about how can I have a meaningful dance with lots of different kinds of people. That becomes the skillful goal for me. How can I find a dance with this person that's so completely different than the one I just had? And yeah, anyways.
That makes me think of two things. One is this pattern. One of the answers to the question of how do I try to approach the thing that I love about this over and over, and it gets sometimes more challenging as time goes on because there's more history and more accumulated material to get through. But I taught a workshop in DC about a month ago called Patterns and Patternless Dancing in Contact Improvisation. So the idea of actually establishing some perhaps useful patterns and then deconstructing them and trying to not do them right or to do only partial and to get that to kind of try to stimulate that space again without saying you shouldn't have patterns or let's get rid of all of these kinds of skills, but how do you play between them and with them, supporting you. So that was just one thing I wanted to, which sort of relates to what you said, but also this brings up a tricky thing. What you said about it teaches me resilience on lots of levels. This is where I think contact improvisation starts to diversify, you could say, or where those different centers of interest happen. Because you're learning some behavior through this exigencies of this form. Like you must pay attention or you can't do it. Long periods of time. I mean, I feel like I learned how to pay attention for long periods of time without really much stopping and not wanting to stop. Like how to be continuous in that way. Huge, huge, huge. And probably more so now in our culture of quick, 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 change, change, change. But, so you come out of it feeling like, wow, I'm learning resilience as a human being. So what you're learning and experiencing doing contact starts to shift into, I love to do contact because I've learned to be resilient. So these other reasons for wanting to do contact and experiencing certain ways of being that seem to be built into the form, because you need them to do it safely. But I think there are some interesting problems there, speaking of solving and creating problems. Like, we talk about generosity as a word that gets used a lot in this field and in the traveling communities and people. Fabulous thing, great thing. What does it mean? You know, I remember Trungpa, actually, the guy who started, the Tibetan Buddhist teacher who started Naropa, talked about idiot compassion. He used to talk about like a certain kind of being nice to everybody was not the point. So how do those things go together where, you know, there's challenges, friendly challenges, but generosity doesn't necessarily mean accepting everything without
Are you saying
resistance.
that the generosity, to use that example, but there are others, that takes away from the focus on these other things that you've named that are core to what you're doing, or is that the rub, or?
Well, I think that because like 40, how long has it been? Like 43 years or something of this work, people want to do it for lots of different reasons. It's incredible. It's amazing, actually, that phenomenon. So that's quite interesting by itself. As generations pass and the culture evolves, like that this is still attractive in different ways to do. But I think that there are different, the reasons are getting more diverse, but also stronger. And maybe the migration of interests creates sort of sub-communities within the larger community, so to speak. And how do those sub-micro interests relate to each other? How do they inform one another? How do they contrast with one another? That really feels like that's going on in the world of people practicing contact that I see within the room that I'm working in and what I read about for Contact Quarterly, for the newsletter, and other things. There's just a lot of different reasons that are not just a dot, they're like being developed. Whole centers are being made.
It's not so hard to imagine. I mean, it is both hard to imagine and not. You know, both of you, I think, embody the form, know the history, live the history, and conceptually understand and teach from that place. And yet I can imagine people who are out there in the world are totally committed to contact would come to your class or your class and not find what they're looking for.
Absolutely.
And that seems
Always.
like really, and it's like, but it's fancy, but it's crisp. But I think that happens because because of these other centers that are taking on their own life.
Yeah.
What's
just
our
wanted
time?
to-
And-
Yeah.
We're approaching
Time,
the,
light.
yeah, you might need to turn a light on here.
Did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say that there's another piece to the resilience thing for me, which is that the goal isn't simply to be resilient, that the resilience allows me to collaborate in ways that I can take risks and you can take risks, and because we have some skill at taking care of ourselves. And so, I mean, one of the things that Contact is so amazing is that when you build a sense of trust with your partner, and you feel them taking care of themselves, and they feel you taking care of yourself, then you can go somewhere. You can challenge yourself and each other in a way that's not reckless, and that it's quite creative. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm drawn to the form is that once I have the skill to be able to handle a lot of different situations, it's not so I can be strong, it's so I can connect with other people and we can go somewhere. We can try things out, and if it doesn't work out, well, I'm not going to get totally hurt. I have some skill to resolve those situations, and they have problem-solving skills, and then we can just muck about. We can try things, and then it really feels creative.
Another factor in this is work, because it has not been certified and directed in that way, is that I think that it asks people to be self-motivating and generative, and if you're not finding what you're interested in, make it. Create it. If the jam you're involved in, you can contribute in lots of different ways, and your contribution is going to have an effect. But if you want to take another path that's more specific in some way, there's nothing to stop you. It's so great. There's nothing to stop you. And then you see if others are attracted to that, and it sort of organizes itself in that way. But it really, I think, either requires, or I like to think it requires, that sense of independence. And that's what you're contributing, you're listening, but you're not just being carried by other things. You have to contribute somehow. And I think that has made all of the different formats and things that have grown up around this work, whether it's teaching material or environments for practice or work that people are doing, writings about it, is to kind of step forward and assume that what you're doing is it, or is you're it. I think distinctions are useful. I think there's a danger also in it morphing to such a point where everything is contact improvisation and therefore nothing is contact improvisation. So how does that reset itself in different ways, in different groups at different times, to have some kind of an anchor and reference?
Shall we finish? Do we want
What do you
questions?
have? Yeah,
Yeah, we
that's,
have
I
time.
think
Yeah,
that was
this
the
is-
idea from 5:30 to 6.
Right, okay,
Just to
great.
open and see what you have to say or
There
ask.
could be questions from in the room or on the web, so.
Can we do on web?
Are you gonna get text from Marlon?
I can have her text me
Okay.
questions.
Okay, we'll see how that part goes. You just let us know.
Okay,
Raise
well.
your
This is
hand.
an experiment, if anybody's out there on this live feed. Oh, by the way, a bunch of you came late, there's a live web stream going through danstech.net, and we'll see if anybody's out there, and I guess you can chat a question in or something.
Yes.
So we'll see.
But here we have a question in the room.
So it was intriguing to me that in all the different lovely words that each of you shared about what happens when people do contact, maybe I just came too late, but I didn't hear the word play. And that's what draws me to it. I feel as an adult, I don't have that many opportunities that I can hang out with other adults and be in a really, open, curious, playful kind of way. My question though is, I noticed that my brain oftentimes notes that, wow, that was like a fluke, but that was like a really good fluke. How could I somehow make that happen again on command? And I just wonder, in your own work, how do you take something that starts as an accident and make it an art?
You mean to repeat a certain movement that was a great fluke?
Yeah, or something that sort of starts out as a fluke, but eventually you're able to bring finesse to it.
Well, I think,
Do you want to do that? Do you want to repeat the fluke that you had? Is that why you're, I'm sort of curious about your question.
Yeah, I find for me that both are great. I'm happy sometimes to just let it be a mystery and, have spontaneity and let it go. And then there are other times when it's really very rewarding and fulfilling that, oh wow, that happened once by chance, but now through craft, I figured out how I can actually cultivate it.
So by that, are you really referring to like a physical interaction with your partner that happened that was kind of cool, and like how did that happen? Or was it a different level of the dance that was cool that you would like to have happen again?
Well, as simple as possible, just something happens, neither of you thought of it, neither of you have experienced it before when you dance together. So maybe there's no answer, it's just a question of throwing it.
I could respond by saying all of my experience is being registered somehow, and I'm using it in the future. So to whatever degree I might want to revisit something about that, like my sense of what that was could be incredibly varied. Like what made that fluke what it was? And what part of it am I revisiting? It breaks down in a lot of different ways, which is why I was asking, but I think that I would say yes, you have a positive, it's like a positive reinforcement thing. You had something that was really engaging for you, it's probably going to come back. You might initiate it, it probably won't be the same, but then you'll have another experience. So it's all material for sure. I don't know if it speaks to.
perhaps another way would be, rather than try to remember the choreography, is to design a problem that would get you back there. And then answer the problem, solve the problem. And of course, it's never going to be the same. But I find myself creating problems, both to keep it interesting, but also to, I'll see something that happens over and over and over, and then I'll try to figure out what's the problem that I need to solve in that situation that keeps coming up over and over and over. So I've often talked about when people are improvising, if they have an avoidance of the ventral side of their body, their underbelly, so to speak, and they're continually steering the body away from that surface, then certain movement pathways are not possible. And so I might create a problem that would safely or gently allow someone to explore that, solving that problem. How can I have half the time that I'm dancing, I'm going to use the soft parts of my body, and half the time I'm going to use the outer surfaces that are more protected. Well, just giving yourself that problem and trying to solve it, gives you new skills. But I'm not trying to do it this way, or do this choreography, because I find that that gets in the way of the dancing, because you're trying to achieve a goal, as opposed to I'm setting off, I have a compass, an orientation, and I have skills to figure things out as I go. And sometimes the failures are the things that, ooh, that didn't work, that give me a lot of information about who I am and how I might solve it differently the next time.
Are there other questions?
Yes. I have a question. Another aspect of contact to me is that it's actually created, that it's kind of become, there's a subculture of contact, and in that culture there are certain values that are created that I think people take from their experience in the form. I just wonder if any of you wanted to speak to that idea that there are values that are being driven by the practice, or the idea of the subculture.
But there are values that are being driven by the
Or
practice.
that we experience in the
Ah.
form, like self-responsibility would be like, one that I think is kind of core. And that leads to sort of communal consensus on certain values. Respect would be another one. I mean, they're pretty, simple civic virtues, but I think there are particular ones that we as practitioners draw from the form that create something of a cultural agreement among dancers. Just an observation maybe, but some questions, how you think about it.
I think it's true, and that's what I meant with the resilience and the generosity thing, and I think it's wonderful, and I think it's also potentially a challenge to assume that. I think the assumption of a we is dangerous. I think that individuality that each person is choosing to meet this moment in their way, and that the assumption of what generosity, what these virtues are and how they manifest, and is dangerous. There's a complicity in that underlying it, I believe in all of those things myself, and I think they're rampant throughout the populations of people who do contact. Maybe because you have to cooperate to have a successful time, to do it. But cooperation doesn't mean agreeing all the time, or comforting each other, or being soft, or all these different things that then can be assumed from those values. Therefore, we should be this, this, and this, or we are not in the community, or we are not good players, or we're not. So I just think there's a danger in that, but I would say they're deeply rooted, as are these challenges, and friendly challenges, and creating problems, not to give you a hard time, but to help us wake each other up and have that feeling of readiness that I find so invigorating about it.
I want to say that I've often felt the danger of in contact where it feels as if we're suspending cultural norms, and so we're creating this bubble, and I try not to think of it, I try not to fuel that too much, in the sense that I think we're rooted ecologically, which includes our culture and our society that we're embedded in. And so I want people to see their contact practice as connected to their ordinary everyday life. I don't want it to be, you enter into this room and anything goes. Like that's not what I signed on for. And which includes also that the assumption that you're looking out for my safety and that I'm looking out for your safety. I guess what I'm agreeing with you in the sense of I try not to make assumptions about what is going on, and I try not to make assumptions that when I touch someone, that they want to be touched by me, and that they want to be touched by me in that way. And so I keep asking myself, is this okay? And what I have to go on is how they behave and how my body perceives that interaction. And that's what I trust, more than sort of a general ethos of what we're supposed to do or what's accepted behavior. It's like, I'm not sure if this is okay, so I'm going to test it out every time. And give myself the chance to acknowledge that it might not be okay, or that I can get it right. Like if it's not right, like we can tune it together.
Stephanie, and then
I don't really have a question, but I have a thank you. Particularly, just the fortitude and the staying with for so long, and that it's just this very rare thing that many techniques, they don't stay open in this conversation, in this dialogue, in this allowance to not pin them down. And that's just been so rare that the form, through the magazine, through language, through pictures, through arguments and problems, and creating problems, like when you said that, creating problems, keeps the form continuously changing. And yes, they get sucked down in different communities and cultural things, and but to see that magazine continue, and I just say thank you for all the people who contributed, especially you for driving it, not getting caught up in its possible economic grandeur. I mean, could have made
Economic
tons
grandeur.
of, could have made tons of
We have to
money,
be
you know.
caught up with it.
All the training programs and the teaching programs and how we could have, made money, which, it's beautiful that it stays in such a nice place. And, it forms its own. Thank you.
Yeah, so it relates to the last point on sort of not having the assumptions, but also the sort of interactions with and implications for culture also beyond the for. And sometimes people, use the phrase social justice and contact and provocation in the same sentence or the same paragraph, and I'm curious if you ever talk about it in any of those ways, and if so, how you would talk about it, or what comes up for you if you hear somebody saying social justice and contact and prov together.
It's like one of these diversifications. Yeah. I mean, one thing I love about contact is how empty it is, how versatile it is. That people can put a lot of different things into it, use it in the study of a lot of different things, and it provides. It gives a lot. It has to do with what you put into it, what you get out of it. But it will take, really, this is remarkable to me. And it doesn't seem to be disturbed by that. I mean, there are disturbing factors, I guess. Especially if somebody decides that their way is right and to just make everybody else have to think the way they're thinking or interpret the way they're interpreting. But that it just keeps being this thing that people can do and learn from and exchange through, and that it does have to do with the body. I mean, ramifications, yes, but I think the social justice word is relatively recent as such, relatively recent. But the values in it and the issues in it, I think, have been streaming along for a very long time, since before contact started, of course. And contact starting in the 70s is significant, at the end of the 60s. And it has been discussed by various people how some of those values were embedded somehow in the form, in terms of lack of hierarchy and in the relationship and the gender things and many different aspects of contact. So I think that there's room for that. It's right for that. And there's one group I was reading about for the new newsletter. It's called Radical Contact, based more in Europe. And they're very clearly using contact improvisation as a vehicle for studying social norms and on gender level, class, a lot of different levels, and studying how to work with that. So they're very clearly their center, their axis is shifted. They're using contact improvisation, but they're not really developing contact improvisation. They're not that interested maybe in the dance form itself, but they like doing it, and they've shifted their emphasis of focus in a certain way, and that form is providing a lot of experience for them to use to articulate things and move on things and whatever. So I think it's really right. But I don't know if I'm dodging your question, if you wanted it more personal.
Just because I get a lot of students from Smith who are very much concerned with social justice issues, and I've always thought that the way you think and your beliefs are embedded in the tissues of your body and in your actions, particularly the things that you're really focused on. And so those students are bringing that into the class, and I'm feeling it through the tissues of my body when I'm dancing with people. So it's front and center for them. And so they're changing. So as much as the form is a frame that allows them to be a part of it, they're also changing the form. Like the whole issue of one of my students was talking to me about consent, and I hadn't thought of that issue so front and center But the way she said it was just like, okay, I'm gonna deal with this, right? And it was like, I hadn't thought of it in that way. But that's the lens that she's coming to everything in her life at that moment. And so she's teaching me. So people's, what they're researching, what they're investigating in their life, it comes into the dancing inevitably. And so the form is inevitably being challenged by people's thinking. And that's a great thing. And I think that it will continue the diversification. But I think what you're saying is that it actually can withstand all that different exploration, and at the end of the day, there's still the practice of people improvising while maintaining some form of physical contact. That there is still some physical practice to engage in, no matter what ideas you're layering on top of it.
On the other hand, this person that's coming to you in the class and consent or whatever, they may think, God, contact is cool. I want to teach it to my friends at home. So the way they teach it then is going to be informed by how they experience it, which might be this thing, and they may invent different ways of coming into contact improvisation that have all to do with this perspective, and they may create forms and language and all of that, and so it just goes on. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, very efficient.
Yeah, this is, when I think of contact, I think it's also a uniquely US-American evolved form. It's global now, and I think of it sort of in like the same breath as perhaps jazz or even beat poetry. And these forms reflect something about the culture that we're in, which is very hard to see because we're in it. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how the confluence of factors that created the birth of the form is connected to the values or perhaps the utopic ideals of our society.
My question's starting to sound easy.
I kind of feel like we've been talking about that, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you were saying that it was embedded in it because of when it happened and how.
But it's so tricky because it's like when they say the ego trying to go to its own funeral. You know, it's like it keeps creeping in this thing of like, oh, we're so open, but then openness becomes a kind of closedness of a kind. And so it's like, how do you keep opening it up, but also, when is what is contact improvisation? But when is it not contact improvisation? Maybe all of these things as they go through, and then they evolve, and they add, and they change. Like, it's remarkable that there's still something that could be called something that has some degree of agreement and seems similar. I mean, there could be a whole other talk that could be very interesting about really going into that one micro area about looking at, has it really changed? It looks sort of the same, and in some levels it seems like it's the same proposition, but I don't even know if that's true. Like having Trisha Brown do things on the walls or on the roof, which was like maybe super radical in the 70s when she did it. You can't look at it the same way in 2015. It just, we're in a different place in time. So I don't know if that's really true with contact too. It still seems to have a utility, obviously. And I do think that a lot of the principles in the physical work are very close to some behavioral principles, philosophical principles too. But it makes me curious about where that diverges. And in Freiburg last summer, there was a guy who was invited to speak about the effect of contact on the global economy or something like that. Which was really, but he's smart and he was interested, you know, he gave the talk, but there was one part of the talk, we're trying to work this up for Contact Quarterly. It's really interesting, because it started a lot of stuff going on there about, because in the end he was saying, look, you know, this this is a good thing you guys have, and it could be threatened, because somebody's gonna capitalize on this and take it and make money on it and ruin it, and you really do have to do it now, everybody. Make the Constitution of contact improvisation. Please make it, it was like really impassioned.
Incorporate.
I mean, it is an
And so
interesting
it
thing.
comes around, and it's like, worth considering, but also, anyway.
But I was just thinking that we're so lucky because it's a very young form, but it's been established, and everyone's still with us. We still have the first generation practitioners and founders of the form for the most part with us on the planet, and so it just made me think like,
Maybe
what?
that's holding it back.
Well, yeah. So something is going to change. It's like when there is a big shift, something that hasn't changed yet, I think will shift, and we don't of course know what that is, but it is an interesting thing, because I think the Constitution is you and Steve and Dave, just all of it. It's like our body, like the people who have, that somehow keeps it what it is, keeps this identifiable thing for now, and maybe that's passing down a little, I don't know.
There's a kind of colonic nature to some of it for me too, because I think some of the resulting experiences that are positive that people have over and over in contact, including the challenges and the resolutions of those, it's possible to think that those results are the thing instead of the results of the thing. So what is the thing that's causing the experience? And how do you continue to refine and clarify that sort of cause instead of determining the outcome? Like this is supposed to be friendly, and this is supposed to be fun, and this is supposed to be, and that's how I know it's contact improvisation. But what I find really useful is to keep looking at what is that keyhole, that wormhole, that proposition that lets everyone sort of pass through on their own and have their own experience that does have similarities, in terms of feeling enlivened or da-da-da. Maybe it's just because it's touch, I don't know, and falling, but how to keep that part clear and clean so it's a vehicle. Chris, to keep...
Good.
Did you want to say something, Chris, before?
Yeah.
I was just going to say that you had mentioned about the attention to subtle movement way back. And that's always been something that was, the small dance is something that I keep coming back to because it is a place where I can really observe the relationship between intention and imagination and perception. And I think if that core was lost, I would feel like I wasn't doing contact for me. That's a really and I wonder when this first generation is no longer with us, if that will still be there. Like, will people still be doing the small dance, and will they know why they're doing it? And I'm not sure that I am doing it for the same reason that Steve was doing it, but certainly the ability to slow down enough to observe how a shift of attention or imagination immediately shifts the tone of your body. The experience of that is profound, and it brings to the front of your awareness that that's going on all the time, and that and similarly that the ways you move and the ways you perceive stimulate your imagination. So it's this reciprocal relationship, and for me the form teaches me so much about how the way I think shapes how I perceive, and how I perceive shapes how I think.
Christine.
I was remembering Steve Jackson organizing a showing of the movie Winter Soldier at Bennington, where I met him. I met him in '72, the year he started contact, but I think this was a year or two later. And the connection between the showing of that movie, which is simply a group of Vietnam vets wanting to share their experience of that war. Felt to me it intrinsically aligned with what contact improvisation was. And that Steve, as a man, in answer to your question about social justice, I felt that what he was doing in both those things was simply saying, listen, and that we are listeners, and that this empty frame image, I keep thinking there's one part of the body that looks like that, which is the ear. You know, it's that the emptiness is listening. And as he always would say, maximize attention, minimize intention. You know, one is listening as one is speaking. And so that well of renewal of the principle of listening seems to me also inherently political, to say everyone should be heard, you know, but also in coming together with someone else into that unknown. My question actually I was going to ask you was, before this started, was after 40 years of teaching it, when originally you would be teaching it as an unknown to people, unknown to this thing. And you would be met with that state of mind of the unknown. Now it's in every dance department and institution, so people show up not with the unknown, but loaded with ideas in their mind known, and wondering how do you get people back into the unknown.
You get yourself back.
And, you know, and then the more I thought about it all the time, I was thinking, well, the empty frame, and it's really in that moment of listening. If you're really present in that, then you have no idea what's going to happen.
That's beautiful. Christy's a deep part of the CQ team and family from the beginning. One beautiful article she wrote was in praise of bad dancing, which I still like to read to classes, which points to a similar opening and awkwardness with possibly with that opening. And Linda Buckhalter is here. She's also a co-editor of CQ. We were pointing people out earlier. So time is finite, and that's as good a place as any to leave it, I would say, personally. If we want to make a little bit of a shift to wrapping and going and eating and hanging out, and you have some things to say about it? You have some things
Well,
to
no, I
say?
was just going to say before we close this conversation, I just want to say thank you for the decades of holding Contact Quarterly and the collaboration and words and practice that you've poured into that, and I think we're all deeply connected to that. It's incredibly meaningful. So thank you for that. Thank you for being on board and continuing a part of keeping it going. And thanks to everybody on the staff. And
Yeah, it's a team effort. It's,
yeah.
I want to give a shout out to Lisa Nelson as one of the co-editors of this.
we mentioned her earlier, but yeah, steadfast.
This is we were having a conversation on the board, and the founders of Contact Quarterly really have been in the job of service to the field of contact improvisation. They have given so much and gotten so little money. So it's an amazing thing that you guys have done. Thank you.